The evening briefing felt like a performance designed to exclude her. Sergeant Olivia "Liv" Reeves sat in the back row of the cramped command tent. Her weathered sniper's logbook balanced on her knees while the commanding officer outlined mission priorities for Operation Thunderstrike. A high-risk extraction in hostile territory deep behind enemy lines. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. First Reconnaissance takes point, Colonel Westfield announced, his laser pointer dancing across the projected terrain map. 2nd Battalion will handle flanking positions at the ridge perimeter. The tent buzzed with anticipation as infantry commanders exchanged confident nods and tactical suggestions. Liv had been a military sniper for 8 years, longer than most of the frontline commanders had been out of officer training. Her Barrett M82A1 wasn't glamorous. A long-range precision rifle that seemed brutally simple compared to the cutting-edge combat systems dominating the equipment lockers. But it could deliver pinpoint accuracy at distances that would leave standard-issue weapons hopelessly outmatched. More importantly, in her hands, it had saved countless American lives across 3 combat deployments. Overwatch detail, the colonel continued, barely glancing in her direction, will provide limited support from secondary positions. A few officers snickered. Captain Ryan Mitchell, the battalion's golden boy, leaned over to his executive officer. "Babysitting duty," he whispered loud enough for half the tent to hear. Liv's jaw tightened, but she remained silent. She'd learned that defending herself only invited more ridicule. Instead, she focused on the satellite imagery streaming across the main display. The enemy encampment was nestled in a mountain valley with multiple elevated positions, perfect for her particular skill set. The intelligence reports showed conflicting assessments about enemy strength. Some indicated a small contingent of perhaps 50 fighters. Others suggested upwards of 300 with heavy weapons capabilities. "Sir," she said, raising her hand slightly, "the thermal signatures in these northeastern quadrants suggest substantially larger force deployment than our initial estimates. We might need more extensive reconnaissance before committing." "Thank you, Sergeant Reeves." Colonel Westfield cut her off with a dismissive wave. "Leave the big picture strategy to the assault teams. Just focus on your limited support role." The tent erupted in barely suppressed laughter. Liv felt heat rise in her cheeks, but she nodded curtly and scribbled notes in her logbook's margins. She'd grown up hunting in Montana's wilderness, where missing a shot meant going hungry, not just failing a training exercise. Her father had taught her that patience and observation were more valuable than brute force, lessons that had kept her alive through 3 tours. After the briefing, Liv walked toward the armory where her spotter, Corporal Marcus Jackson, was prepping their equipment. Marcus looked up from cleaning his spotting scope, his expression apologetic. "Heard the brief didn't go so well." "Same as always," Liv replied, pulling on her tactical gloves. "They want the skill, just not the messenger." Staff Sergeant Elena Rodriguez emerged from the weapons locker, carrying additional ammunition. "Their loss," she said bluntly. "Half those infantry commanders have never seen actual combat beyond controlled exercises. The rest of their small specialized unit gathered around. Communications Specialist Ramirez, Medic Peterson, and Security Element Wallace. They'd worked together for 18 months, long enough to develop an unspoken trust. Unlike the infantry battalions with their aggressive camaraderie, Liv's team operated with quiet efficiency. "Weather windows closing fast," Ramirez announced, studying the meteorological data. "If we're going to get into position before the operation kicks off, we need to move within the hour." Liv nodded, then noticed something that made her stomach drop. Taped to her rifle case was a bright pink toy doll with Barbie Sniper scrawled across it in permanent marker. A note was taped underneath. "Don't forget your accessories, Princess. Your friends in 1st Recon." Marcus saw her face and started to reach for it, but Liv held up a hand. "Leave it." She opened her case, the plastic doll crinkling under her grip. If they wanted to play games, she wouldn't give them the satisfaction of a reaction. As they loaded their gear onto the transport vehicles, Liv watched the infantry units assemble on the main staging area. Captain Mitchell's team bore fresh unit patches, a cartoon eagle clutching lightning bolts. He gave her a mock salute as they passed by, grinning behind his tactical gear. The command assigned her team to depart 30 minutes after the main force, relegating them to secondary importance. As they prepared to move out, Liv caught a glimpse of the memorial wall where her previous spotter's photo hung among the fallen. A reminder of what happened when commanders ignored intelligence reports from specialists. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. 3 hours into deployment, as they approached their designated Overwatch position, the radio crackled to life. All units, all units. Operation is green. First Recon reports minimal resistance at Checkpoint Alpha. Liv exchanged glances with Marcus. Something felt wrong about the intel. The thermal reading she'd identified suggested a much larger enemy presence than what was being reported. She keyed her mic. "Command, this is Overwatch Actual. Requesting permission to divert to Ridgeline Charlie for better coverage." A long pause then. "Overwatch negative. Maintain your assigned position as briefed. First Recon has situation under control." Liv studied her terrain map, then the growing darkness ahead. Somewhere in those shadows was information that could save lives. The real-time intelligence that would tell the battalion exactly what they were walking into. "Command, Overwatch is observing thermal anomalies consistent with additional force concentration. Request permission to verify. Negative, Overwatch. Maintain position." "That's an order." As she settled into their assigned spot, the toy doll crinkled in her pocket. Let them laugh, she thought. When the operation was over, they'd see who deserved respect. Their position offered limited visibility, exactly as she had feared. The mountains created blind spots precisely where she suspected enemy reinforcements might be gathering. Marcus set up the spotting scope while Rodriguez established their security perimeter. "Liv," Marcus whispered, his voice tense. "I'm seeing movement 3 clicks east of the main operation. Outside First Recon surveillance zone." She crawled forward and peered through her scope. In the growing darkness, using her thermal imaging attachment, she could make out the unmistakable signatures of vehicles moving under camouflage, dozens of them. "Command, Overwatch reporting multiple vehicle signatures east of target area. Appears to be mechanized infantry, at least company strength." The radio crackled with static then. "Overwatch, command. Intelligence confirms no enemy mechanized capabilities in the area. Maintain position and radio discipline." Liv felt a chill run down her spine. She'd seen this pattern before on her first deployment, commanders, so committed to their operational plan that they dismissed contrary intelligence. That time, it had cost 16 lives, including her first spotter. "Marcus, what do you think?" she asked, keeping her voice steady. He studied the thermal readings again. "Those are definitely vehicles. BMP-style transports, maybe 30 of them. That's enough to carry at least a battalion of troops. If First Recon walks into that..." Liv made a decision that went against everything in the military handbook. "Rodriguez, Ramirez, Peterson, gather essential gear only. Wallace, prepare to move immediately." Her team stared at her. "Liv," Peterson said quietly, "that would be directly disobeying orders." "I know," she replied, already packing her rifle. "But there are 395 soldiers walking into an ambush. If we stay here, they'll die never knowing what hit them." Marcus hesitated for only a moment before beginning to pack his equipment. "Where are we going?" Liv pointed to a steep ridgeline nearly 2 miles away, A dangerous climb in the dark, but one that would give them visibility over the entire valley. There, if I'm wrong, I'll accept whatever consequences come. But if I'm right, the unspoken reality hung between them. If she was right, the entire battalion would be slaughtered without their intervention. Command will court-martial you for this, Rodriguez warned, even as she began packing her gear. Only if we fail, Liv replied, slinging her rifle. The reality was starker than that. They might all face disciplinary action regardless, but at least the battalion would survive. The climb was grueling. Steep terrain in near-total darkness, with each of them carrying essential equipment. Twice they had to redirect when their path became impassable. Every minute felt like an hour, knowing what might be happening to the battalion below. Ramirez maintained radio silence as ordered, only monitoring emergency channels. Halfway up the ridge, they heard it, the first reports of contact, followed by increasingly frantic calls for support. Command, 1st Recon taking heavy fire. Multiple enemy positions were surrounded. Where the hell did they come from? The radio chatter grew more desperate as they raced against time and gravity, pushing their bodies beyond normal limits. When they finally reached the ridgeline position, they were greeted with a nightmarish scene below. The entire valley had erupted into a massive firefight. 1st Recon was pinned down in the center, surrounded by enemy forces that had emerged from hidden positions. 2nd Battalion was trying to maneuver to support them, but was itself taking fire from the eastern slopes, exactly where Liv had spotted the vehicle movements. My God, Marcus breathed, surveying the battlefield through his spotting scope. There must be 700 enemy combatants down there. Liv wasted no time. She unpacked her rifle with practiced efficiency, assembling it in seconds rather than minutes. As she calibrated her scope, she calmly assessed the situation. The battalion was in danger of being completely overrun, cut off from their extraction points, and vastly outnumbered. Ramirez, patch me into battalion command frequency, she ordered, settling behind her rifle. When he handed her the radio, she took a deep breath. Command, this is Overwatch Actual. We have relocated to Ridgeline Charlie and have full visibility of the battlefield. Enemy force is approximately battalion strength with mechanized support. 1st Recon is surrounded and 2nd Battalion is being flanked from the east. Colonel Westfield's voice came through, tight with stress and anger. Overwatch, you were ordered to maintain position. What the hell are you doing? Saving 395 American soldiers, sir, she replied calmly. I have solutions for multiple high-value enemy targets, including what appears to be their command element. Request permission to engage. A long pause filled with the sounds of gunfire in the background. Then, engage at will, Overwatch. Get our people out of there. What happened next would later be described in classified reports as the most extraordinary display of precision, marksmanship in modern combat history. Liv began methodically eliminating enemy commanders, communication specialists, and heavy weapons operators. One shot, one kill, over and over again with machine-like precision. Marcus called out distances, wind adjustments, and target priorities. Target, enemy commander, 1,247 meters, slight right to left wind. Liv controlled her breathing, felt her heartbeat slow, and squeezed the trigger. Through her scope, she watched the enemy commander fall. Before his body hit the ground, she was already acquiring her next target. Enemy machine gun position threatening 1st Recon's eastern flank. 1,380 meters, 2-minute wind adjustment. Another shot, another kill. The heavy machine gun fell silent. Down in the valley, the effect of her precision shooting created immediate confusion among enemy forces. Their coordinated attack began to falter as commanders and specialized operators disappeared one by one. Radio operators, heavy weapons teams, vehicle commanders, each removed with surgical precision from over a mile away. Enemy mortar team establishing position to hit 2nd Battalion, 1,550 meters. Liv's shot took out the team leader, sending the others scrambling for cover. The mortar tubes lay abandoned. In the command center, Colonel Westfield watched the battlefield dynamics shift in real time as Liv systematically dismantled the enemy's command and control structure. What had been a devastating ambush was transforming into disorganized chaos. For 4 hours straight, without breaks, food, or water, Liv continued her deadly work. Her shoulders burned from the rifle's recoil, and her eyes strained from the unrelenting focus, but she never slowed, never faltered. 63 confirmed kills, each one precisely targeted to create maximum tactical disruption. By dawn, what remained of the enemy forces was in full retreat. The battalion, though bloodied and battered, had survived what should have been a massacre. Medevac helicopters began arriving to evacuate the wounded, as Liv finally allowed her rifle barrel to cool. Marcus looked at her with something approaching awe. "I've never seen anything like that." Liv didn't respond immediately. She was thinking of all the families who wouldn't receive death notifications because of what they'd done. She thought about her previous spotter, whose death might have been prevented if someone had listened to specialists instead of dismissing them. "Overwatch Command," the radio crackled. It was Colonel Westfield's voice, subdued and respectful in a way it had never been before. "Battalion reports enemy forces in full retreat. Casualty count significantly lower than it should have been. Your new position saved the entire operation." Liv keyed her mic. "Command Overwatch. Just doing my job, sir." "I think we need to reevaluate exactly what your job is, Sergeant Reeves. Report to me personally when you return to base." As they packed their equipment, the sun rising over the battlefield revealed the true scale of what they'd narrowly avoided. Enemy vehicles lay abandoned. What should have been a massacre had turned into a hard-fought victory. "They're going to court-martial you for disobeying direct orders," Rodriguez said, helping to pack the spotting scope. "Maybe," Liv conceded. "But 395 soldiers are still alive." Peterson checked his medical supplies, noting what he'd used to treat Wallace's minor injuries sustained during their climb. "Would you do it again? Knowing the consequences?" Liv thought about the toy doll, the mockery, the dismissive attitudes from command. None of that mattered now. What mattered was that when lives hung in the balance, she'd done what needed to be done. "Every time," she answered simply. As they made their treacherous descent from the ridgeline, Liv knew her career might be over. Disobeying direct orders, regardless of the outcome, carried severe penalties in the military hierarchy. But looking at the medevac helicopters carrying wounded soldiers rather than bodies, she felt a deep sense of certainty. Some rules were meant to be broken when lives were at stake. Some orders needed to be disobeyed when following them meant disaster. And sometimes, the person everyone underestimated was exactly the one who could see what nobody else could. The radio chatter from the battalion filled their ears as they descended, reports of the miraculous shots that had appeared from nowhere, taking out enemy commanders with impossible precision. Someone in 1st Recon had started calling her Guardian Angel, not knowing who had saved them. Only that death had come for their enemies from an unseen protector. Liv allowed herself a small smile. Let them keep their Barbie sniper jokes. She knew what she was capable of. More importantly, now they knew too. By the time they reached base 12 hours later, exhausted and filthy from their ordeal, word of what they'd done had spread through the entire forward operating base. Soldiers stopped and stared as they walked toward command, some nodding in silent respect, others simply watching in awe. Colonel Westfield was waiting for them, his face unreadable. "Sergeant Reeves." "My office, now." As she followed him, Liv prepared herself for the end of her military career. She regretted nothing, regardless of what came next. Inside his office, the colonel closed the door and faced her. For a long moment, he said nothing, just studied her with new eyes. 63 confirmed enemy Kier, he finally said, including their entire command structure. From a position our intelligence didn't even consider viable. Liv stood at attention, eyes forward. Sir, you directly disobeyed orders, Sergeant. Under normal circumstances, that would end your career. He paused, his expression softening slightly. But these weren't normal circumstances, were they? No, sir. He walked to his desk and picked up a report. I've been reviewing your service record. Your previous warnings about intelligence assessments. Your recommendations that were dismissed. He set the papers down. It seems we've been making the same mistake repeatedly, not listening to the people with the most relevant expertise. Liv remained silent, uncertain where this was heading. I'm not going to court-martial you, Sergeant Reeves. In fact, I'm recommending you for a Silver Star. He held up a hand before she could respond. And more importantly, I'm creating a new tactical reconnaissance unit under your command. You'll have full authority to select your team and determine your own operational parameters. She blinked, struggling to process this unexpected turn. Sir, the military needs specialists who can see what others miss, Sergeant, and who have the courage to act on it, even when ordered otherwise. He extended his hand. We almost lost an entire battalion yesterday. You prevented that. I'd be a fool to punish you for it. As she left the colonel's office, still processing what had happened, Liv found Captain Mitchell waiting outside. The mockery was gone from his face, replaced by something that looked remarkably like respect. Sergeant, he said quietly, I owe you an apology. And my life. She thought about all the insults, the jokes, the pink doll still in her pocket. They seemed trivial now compared to what they'd accomplished. Just doing my job, Captain, she replied, echoing her words from the battlefield. But they both knew it had been much more than that. 3 days later, as Liv reviewed applications for her new specialized unit, she found a small box on her desk. Inside was a custom-made unit patch, a guardian angel with a sniper rifle. The note attached simply read, from the 395 who came home. Thank you. 6 months after the fateful mission that earned her both the Silver Star and command of the newly formed Special Reconnaissance and Tactical Intelligence Unit, SRTIU. Sergeant First Class Olivia Reeves found herself back in a command briefing. This time, however, the atmosphere couldn't have been more different. Sergeant Reeves, your assessment, please, Colonel Westfield said, gesturing to her with genuine respect. Liv stood and approached the tactical display, conscious of how the room fell silent. The same officers who had once mocked her now watched with rapt attention. She indicated several positions on the digital terrain map, highlighting thermal anomalies and suspicious movement patterns. Intelligence suggests a high-value target meeting occurring in this compound, she explained, pointing to a structure nestled in a remote mountain valley. However, the approach routes are heavily monitored, and satellite imagery shows these ridgelines are likely equipped with early warning systems. She outlined her proposed operation with methodical precision, small teams, unconventional entry points, and specialized equipment that would allow them to observe undetected for extended periods. Captain Mitchell, once her most vocal critic, nodded appreciatively. That's why we need SRTIU on this one. Standard approaches would trigger every alarm they have. When the briefing concluded, Liv gathered her materials as Colonel Westfield approached. Walk with me, Sergeant, he said, leading her outside the command tent. The forward operating base had changed in subtle ways since her unit's formation. The snide remarks and dismissive attitudes had given way to professional respect. Her team, once relegated to the margins, now occupied a central role in mission planning and execution. Washington is watching this operation closely, Westfield said as they walked. General Harrington himself requested your team specifically after reviewing your track record these past 6 months. Liv nodded, processing this information. She'd spent years being underestimated and overlooked. The sudden recognition felt almost foreign. "They're calling you the Guardian, back at the Pentagon," Westfield continued with a hint of amusement. "Seems that nickname from the battalion stuck." "Just doing my job, sir," she replied automatically, the same phrase she'd used that day on the ridge. Westfield stopped walking and faced her. "That's why I recommended you for this command, Reeves. Because you see it as the job, not the glory." He handed her a file folder. "Full operational authority. I've approved your plan exactly as presented." As Liv returned to the SRTIU barracks, she found her team already preparing equipment. The original 5 who had climbed that ridge with her remained the core of the unit, now expanded to 15 specialists handpicked for their unique skills and overlooked talents. Marcus looked up from calibrating his new advanced spotting scope. "How'd it go with the brass?" "Green light," she replied, setting down the authorization papers. "Full operational parameters, exactly as we planned." Rodriguez whistled softly. 6 months ago, they wouldn't even let you finish a sentence in briefing. Now they're giving you carte blanche on a Tier 1 operation. Amazing what saving 395 lives will do for your credibility," Peterson quipped, organizing medical supplies. Wallace, their security specialist who had taken shrapnel during the Ridge operation, grinned. Or maybe they finally realized having a woman in charge means things actually get done properly. Liv allowed herself a small smile as she began reviewing the equipment lists. The pink Barbie sniper doll that had once been meant as an insult now sat proudly on a shelf in their barracks, a reminder of how far they'd come. Ramirez approached, tablet in hand. "Latest intel download from Satellite Pass," he said, showing her updated imagery. "Something's changed at the target location. More vehicles, increased security. Whatever meeting is happening there, it's bigger than we thought." Liv studied the images carefully. "We'll need to adjust our insertion point. This ridge here gives better coverage with less exposure." She traced a path on the tablet. "It's a harder climb, but you've never taken the easy path anyway," Marcus finished with a knowing smile. As they continued preparations, a young private entered the barracks, clearly nervous. "Sergeant Reeves, this just came for you." He handed her a small package. Inside was a custom-made combat knife with Guardian engraved on the blade and a note. "From the families of the 395, we sleep better knowing you're out there." Liv stared at the knife, momentarily speechless. In her 8 years of service, through all the missions and deployments, she'd never received such recognition. She'd done her duty in the shadows, unacknowledged and often disrespected. "You okay, boss?" Marcus asked, noticing her expression. She tucked the knife into her tactical vest. "Just ready to work." 2 days later, under cover of darkness, Liv led her team through treacherous mountain terrain toward their observation point. Unlike their desperate scramble up the ridge 6 months earlier, this movement was deliberate and precisely planned. The 15-member unit moved in 3 smaller teams, each approaching from different vectors to establish a triangulated surveillance net around the target compound. Liv led the primary team, which would establish the main observation post at the highest vantage point. The climb was arduous, steep rock faces, loose scree, and narrow ledges that required perfect balance while carrying heavy equipment. 4 hours in, they reached a particularly challenging vertical section. "This wasn't on the satellite imagery," Wallace whispered, studying the sheer rock face before them. Liv scanned the wall, identifying potential handholds. Recent rockslide must have changed the terrain. She unhooked her climbing gear. "I'll establish the route." Before anyone could protest, she was already ascending, finding invisible purchase points on the seemingly smooth surface. Her movements were fluid and confident, each placement deliberate. Growing up in Montana's mountains had given her skills no military training could replicate. When she reached the top, she secured anchor points for the others. As the team followed her lead, Marcus shook his head in amazement. You know, most unit commanders would send someone else up first. Not my style, Liv replied, helping him onto the ledge. Never ask someone to do something you wouldn't do yourself. By dawn, all 3 teams were in position, hidden observation posts established with perfect sightlines to the target compound. Liv settled behind her rifle, the same Barrett M82, one that had saved the battalion, now upgraded with state-of-the-art optics and customized to her specifications. "Comms check," she whispered. One by one, her team members confirmed their positions and operational status. For 3 days, they maintained constant surveillance, documenting every vehicle, every guard rotation, every subtle pattern that might reveal the compound's true purpose. They endured freezing nights and blistering days, remaining motionless for hours to avoid detection. On the 4th day, Ramirez caught something on their signals intelligence equipment. "Boss, increased encrypted communications. Something's happening." Within hours, their patience was rewarded. A convoy of unmarked vehicles arrived at the compound, bringing figures that matched the descriptions of several high-value targets, terrorist leaders responsible for attacks that had claimed hundreds of American and Allied lives. "Confirmation on targets Alpha and Echo," Marcus whispered, his spotting scope capturing facial recognition details. "Possibly Bravo as well, but can't get a clean visual yet." Liv documented everything, transmitting secure data packets back to command. This intelligence alone would justify their mission, providing confirmation of associations and locations that had eluded conventional surveillance for years. As night fell, Ramirez intercepted more communications. "They're discussing a major operation. Something big, within the next 48 hours. Liv processed this information, weighing their options. Their mission parameters were clear: observe and report only, no engagement. But the intelligence suggested an imminent threat that could cost more lives if not addressed immediately. "Ramirez, can you get a secure channel to Colonel Westfield? I need to update him directly." Before Ramirez could respond, their perimeter sensors triggered silent alerts. Marcus scanned the surrounding terrain. Movement, multiple directions. Professional patterns, not local militia. Liv immediately recognized the threat. "We've been compromised. Initiate Protocol Sierra." Her team moved with practiced efficiency, quickly packing essential equipment and preparing alternative extraction routes. But as Wallace checked their planned escape path, he returned with grim news. "They're boxing us in." All 3 teams. This isn't random. They knew exactly where to look. The realization hit Liv like a physical blow. Someone had leaked their operation details. They were 15 operators, now surrounded by what intelligence suggested was a force numbering in the hundreds, with more arriving hourly. Ramirez finally established communication with base. "Command acknowledges situation," he reported. "QRF is spinning up, but nearest assets are 3 hours out minimum." 3 hours. Against the forces gathering around them, they wouldn't last 30 minutes in direct engagement. Rodriguez voiced what everyone was thinking. "Someone sold us out. This is a trap." Liv assessed their tactical situation with cold precision. They were outmanned, outgunned, with no immediate support and dwindling options. By conventional military assessment, their situation was hopeless. But Olivia Reeves had never put much stock in conventional assessments. "Ramirez, get me communications with the other 2 teams," she ordered, already formulating a plan. "Marcus, I need exact positions of all enemy forces you can identify." As her team provided the requested information, Liv studied the terrain map. 3 separated teams, each surrounded, with enemy forces closing in from all directions. Traditional military doctrine would suggest consolidating forces, bringing all 3 teams together for a stronger defensive position. Liv saw a different path. "We're not consolidating, and we're not waiting for extraction," she announced. "We're going to hit them first, from 3 directions simultaneously." Her team stared at her in disbelief. "They're expecting us to run or hide," she explained. "They've set up containment perimeters based on that assumption. But they've left their command elements exposed, thinking we can't reach them." She pointed to 3 locations on their tactical display. "They're command posts. 3 teams, 3 targets. We hit them simultaneously, create confusion in their ranks, then extract through the resulting chaos." Wallace shook his head. "Even with surprise, the odds were worse on that ridge 6 months ago," Liv interrupted. "And we're better equipped now, better trained." She looked each team member in the eye. "More importantly, we know something they don't." "What's that?" Peterson asked. Liv allowed herself a rare smile. "That they should have sent more men." The plan was audacious to the point of insanity. Each team would move aggressively toward enemy command positions rather than away from them. Instead of 15 operators fleeing in panic, they would become 15 precision weapons striking at the heart of the enemy force. Team 2, led by Rodriguez, would hit the eastern command post. Team 3, under Wallace, would take the western position. Liv's Team 1 would strike the central command, where intelligence indicated the operations leader was coordinating. "Synchronize watches," Liv ordered. "Execute in 30 minutes precisely." As her team made final preparations, checking weapons and distributing the limited ammunition, Marcus approached her. "You know this goes against every extraction protocol in the book." "The book didn't account for our situation," she replied, checking her rifle's action. "Sometimes you have to write new pages." Marcus nodded, then asked the question everyone was thinking. "If we pull this off, and that's a big if, what about whoever sold us out? Someone back at command betrayed this operation." Liv secured her tactical vest. "First we survive. Then we find the leak." As the designated time approached, Liv's team moved into position, using the terrain features she had identified during their surveillance. Natural drainage channels, rock formations, and shadow patterns created an invisible pathway directly toward the enemy's central command post. At precisely the appointed moment, all 3 teams moved simultaneously. Liv led her team through a narrow ravine. By passing 2 sentry positions, by staying in their blind spots, gaps she had identified during their observation. When they encountered an unavoidable patrol, she used her knife rather than her rifle, eliminating the threat silently. They reached the perimeter of the central command post, a reinforced tent structure, surrounded by communications equipment and guards. Liv signaled to her team, each member understanding their precise role without words needed. On her mark, they struck with coordinated precision. Ramirez disabled their communications with a targeted electromagnetic pulse device. Peterson and Marcus provided covering fire from concealed positions. Liv moved directly toward the command tent, her movement so fluid and fast that the guards barely had time to register her presence before falling. Inside the tent, she found exactly what intelligence had suggested, the operations commander, surrounded by maps and communications equipment. The man reached for his weapon, but froze when he found himself staring down the barrel of Liv's sidearm. "American," he said, his accent thick but his English clear. "You were supposed to be running away, not here." "Poor intelligence," Liv replied coldly. "Seems to be going around." Across the operational area, Teams 2 and 3 executed similarly successful strikes, creating precisely the confusion Liv had anticipated. Enemy forces, expecting to close in on fleeing targets, suddenly found their command structure decapitated and their communications disrupted. What had been a coordinated operation to eliminate Liv's teams devolved into disorganized chaos. Liv secured the commander and the intelligence materials surrounding him. "Ramirez, inform command that we have the primary target and critical intelligence." Request immediate extraction at the alternate landing zone. As her team moved to the extraction point, they could hear the disarray spreading through enemy ranks. Without central coordination, the hundreds of fighters became a disorganized mob, shooting at shadows and frequently at each other. By the time the extraction helicopters arrived, all three of Liv's teams had reached the landing zone, bringing with them the enemy commander and intelligence documents, detailing planned attacks against American forces and civilian targets. What should have been the annihilation of her entire unit had become one of the most successful intelligence operations of the conflict. As the helicopters lifted off, Liv looked back at the chaos below. Someone had tried to kill her team by leaking their position. Someone at command had betrayed them. That threat remained, even as they escaped the immediate danger. Marcus, reading her expression, leaned closer to be heard above the helicopter's rotor. "What's the plan for finding the leak?" Liv's expression hardened. "They just made the biggest mistake of their career. They assumed we wouldn't come back." When they landed at base, Colonel Westfield was waiting, his face a mixture of relief and barely contained fury. "Sergeant Reeves, your team should have been wiped out. That operation was compromised at the highest level." "I'm aware, sir," she replied, escorting the captured enemy commander toward waiting military intelligence officers. "Someone wanted us dead. Instead, we brought you a gift." Westfield's eyes widened as he recognized the prisoner. "How in God's name?" "By doing exactly what they didn't expect," Liv explained. "Now we need to find who sold us out before they disappear." Westfield nodded grimly. "My office. 1 hour. Bring only those you absolutely trust." That meeting revealed the full extent of the situation. The operation had been leaked by someone with access to the highest levels of mission planning. Someone who had known not just their general location, but the precise positioning of all three observation teams. "We've narrowed it down to 7 possibilities," Westfield explained, showing Liv a list of names. Each had access to the complete operational details. Liv studied the list, recognizing most of the names as senior officers and intelligence personnel. One name, however, made her blood run cold. "Major Lawrence Hayes," she read aloud. "Isn't he the liaison who specifically requested our unit for this mission?" Westfield nodded slowly, claiming to represent General Harrington's interests. "We've since confirmed that Harrington made no such request." The pieces fell into place. Hayes had positioned himself as their advocate, ensuring you would be assigned the mission. He had reviewed their operational plans in detail, all while setting them up for annihilation. "I need to speak with him," Liv said, her voice dangerously calm. "That won't be possible," Westfield replied. "Hayes disappeared 12 hours ago, shortly after we lost communication with your teams. He's in the wind." Liv absorbed this information, her mind already formulating the next steps. "Then we hunt him down. The same way we found that commander in the field." Westfield studied her for a long moment. "This would be off the books, Sergeant Reeves. Completely unauthorized. If you're caught pursuing a U.S. military officer without explicit orders—" "With respect, sir," Liv interrupted, "he tried to kill 15 American operators and compromise critical intelligence. He's not a U.S. officer anymore. He's a traitor and a target." The colonel didn't immediately respond, weighing the implications. Finally, he slid a folder across the table. "Hayes has multiple known aliases and properties. Intelligence believes he may attempt to leave the country through one of these locations." Liv accepted the folder. "Thank you, sir." "I never gave you that information," Westfield said firmly. "And this conversation never happened." 3 days later, Liv and Marcus were positioned on a rooftop overlooking a private airfield in Turkey. Intelligence from the folder suggested Hayes might use this location to escape to non-extradition countries. "Movement at the hangar," Marcus whispered, his spotting scope focused on a private jet being prepared for departure. 2 SUVs approaching. Confirmation on target. It's Hayes. Liv watched through her rifle scope as the man who had betrayed her team emerged from the vehicle, accompanied by armed guards. Even at this distance, she could see the nervousness in his movements as he hurried toward the waiting aircraft. Range 1,287 meters, slight crosswind from the east, Marcus provided, as he had hundreds of times before. Liv adjusted her scope, compensating for distance, wind, and the minute vibrations of the building beneath them. She controlled her breathing, felt her heartbeat slow, and prepared to take the shot that would eliminate the man who had nearly killed her entire unit. But as her fingers settled on the trigger, she hesitated. This wasn't a battlefield decision in the heat of combat. This was a calculated act that crossed a line she had never crossed before. Hayes deserved justice, but did she have the right to deliver it this way? "What's the holdup?" Marcus whispered. "He's about to board." Liv remained motionless, her scope fixed on Hayes as he approached the aircraft steps. In that moment, she made a decision that would define the next chapter of her career. She adjusted her aim slightly and squeezed the trigger. The shot echoed across the airfield as the concrete at Hayes' feet exploded, sending him diving to the ground in terror. His guards scrambled in confusion, weapons raised but with no target visible. Liv's second shot disabled the aircraft's nose gear, ensuring it wouldn't be taking off. Her third shot struck the fuel truck nearby, not to ignite it but to pierce the tank, creating a spreading pool of jet fuel that effectively closed the escape route. "What are you doing?" Marcus asked, bewildered. "You had the shot." Liv was already packing her rifle. Getting justice, not revenge. She activated her secure communication device. "This is Guardian. Package located at coordinates transmitted. Ready for pickup." Hours later, they watched from a secure location as Turkish authorities, acting on an anonymous intelligence tip, arrested Hayes and his associates. The evidence Liv had provided, traced through the intelligence they'd captured during their escape, was overwhelming. Hayes wouldn't face a quick death on a remote airfield. He would face trial, public exposure of his treachery, and the full weight of military justice. As they prepared to return to base, Marcus finally asked the question that had been bothering him. "Why didn't you take the shot?" After what he did, nobody would have questioned it. Liv secured her equipment, thinking carefully before answering. "I would have questioned it. Every day for the rest of my life." She looked at her friend and spotter. "We're not assassins, Marcus. We're soldiers. The difference matters." What Hayes had never understood, what so many who underestimated Olivia Reeves failed to grasp, was that her greatest strength wasn't her marksmanship or tactical brilliance. It was her unwavering moral compass, even in the darkest moments. She had disobeyed orders to save 395 lives. But she wouldn't cross the line into becoming the very thing they fought against, even when revenge was within her grasp. That, more than any medal or commendation, defined the Guardian. 2 years after the Hayes incident, Liv found herself in an unfamiliar position, standing before the Senate Armed Services Committee in Washington, D.C. Her dress uniform adorned with medals she had never sought. The committee room buzzed with anticipation as senators and military officials arranged their papers and prepared their questions. Liv stood at parade rest, her posture perfect but her mind racing. How had a sniper from Montana ended up testifying before Congress? The journey from that ridge where she'd saved 395 lives to this mahogany-paneled room felt surreal. Senator Richard Donovan, the committee chairman, called the session to order. Today we continue our hearings on Special Operations Restructuring with testimony from Master Sergeant Olivia Reeves, commander of the Special Reconnaissance and Tactical Intelligence Unit. The formality felt strange. In the field, she was simply Liv or Guardian to those who served with her. Here, her achievements were recited like passages from a history book. "Sergeant Reeves," Donovan continued, Your unit has rewritten the playbook on special reconnaissance over the past 2 years. You've been awarded the Silver Star, 2 Bronze Stars, and a Purple Heart. Your operations have directly saved hundreds of American lives and prevented multiple terrorist attacks on U.S. interests. He adjusted his glasses, peering at her over the rims. Yet you're here today not to receive accolades, but to address systemic issues within our Special Operations Command structure. Please proceed. Liv stepped to the microphone, her voice steady despite her discomfort with public speaking. Thank you, Senator. I'm not here to criticize our military leadership or structure. I'm here because there are voices in the field that often go unheard until it's too late. She recounted the original mission where she disobeyed orders to save the battalion, carefully avoiding any hint of self-aggrandizement. Instead, she focused on the structural problems that had created the situation: the dismissal of intelligence from specialists, the rigid adherence to plans despite contradictory evidence, the institutional bias against certain units and personnel. The issue isn't individual commanders making mistakes, she explained. It's a system that sometimes values conformity over competence, protocol over effectiveness, and tradition over truth. Senator Elizabeth Carver, a former military officer herself, leaned forward. Sergeant Reeves, you're advocating for fundamental changes to command structures that have existed for decades. Why should we consider such dramatic revisions based on your experiences? Liv met her gaze directly. Because the battlefield has changed, Senator. While many of our approaches haven't. Today's conflicts require specialized skills and adaptability that our current structure sometimes inhibits rather than enhances. She detailed her proposal: specialized reconnaissance units embedded with tactical authority, communication channels that allowed critical intelligence to reach decision-makers without being filtered through multiple command layers, and evaluation systems that rewarded effectiveness rather than adherence to convention. The enemy adapts constantly, she concluded. We must do the same. For 3 hours, senators and military officials questioned her, some supportive, others skeptical or openly hostile. Throughout, Liv remained composed, answering with the same precision she applied to her shooting. No wasted words, no missed targets. When the hearing finally concluded, General Michael Harrison, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, approached her. That was quite a performance, Sergeant Reeves. Not a performance, sir. Just the truth as I see it. Harrison studied her for a moment. Walk with me. They moved through the capital's ornate corridors. An odd pair, the 4-star general with decades of prestigious service and the unconventional sergeant, who had repeatedly broken rules to save lives. Your proposals are going to meet significant resistance, Harrison said finally. Change doesn't come easily to an institution as old as ours. Liv nodded. I expected that, sir. Yet you testified anyway, knowing it could impact your career. Some things are more important than careers, General. Harrison stopped walking and turned to face her. Like 395 lives? Like making sure we never need to choose between following orders and saving lives in the first place. The general smiled unexpectedly. You know, I disobeyed a direct order once, early in my career. Saved 37 men in Vietnam. He paused, his expression growing serious. The difference is, I didn't try to change the system afterward. I just worked within it. With respect, sir, perhaps you should have. Instead of the rebuke she expected, Harrison laughed, a genuine sound of surprise and something approaching admiration. You really don't have any fear, do you, Reeves? I fear plenty, sir. Just not speaking truth to power. Harrison resumed walking. I've been authorized to offer you a promotion. Lieutenant Colonel, with command of an expanded Special Operations Group. Implementing some of your ideas on a larger scale. Liv's step faltered briefly. I'm not an officer, sir. A battlefield commission. Unusual, but not unprecedented. The offer was tempting, a chance to implement the changes, She believed in with the authority and resources to make them effective. But something in the general's tone made her cautious. "What's the catch, sir?" Harrison's expression remained neutral. "Your Senate testimony would need to be moderated. Focus on the successes, downplay the systemic criticisms. Present yourself as exceptional rather than representative of broader issues." Liv understood immediately. They wanted to promote her to silence her, make her the exception that proved the rule rather than the catalyst for change. Elevate her while burying her message. "I'm honored by the offer, General, but I'll need to think about it." Harrison nodded as if he'd expected this response. "Of course. Though I should mention, the SRTIU's future funding and operational authority are currently under review. As a lieutenant colonel, you'd have considerably more influence over those decisions." The implication was clear: accept the promotion and special treatment, or risk losing the unit she had built. Back at her temporary quarters that evening, Liv found Marcus waiting. He'd accompanied her to Washington as her senior NCO and most trusted confidant. "How'd the closed session go?" he asked, noting her troubled expression. "They offered me a promotion. Lieutenant Colonel." Marcus's eyebrows shot up. "That's unexpected, is it?" She poured herself a rare drink, bourbon, neat. Easiest way to silence criticism is to make the critic part of the system. "What are you going to do?" Liv stared into her glass. "I don't know. They're holding the unit's future over my head." Marcus leaned forward. "You know, for all your tactical brilliance, you sometimes miss the obvious strategic play. Enlighten me." "They're afraid of you, Liv. Not just of what you might say, but of what you represent. That ridge changed everything, not just for us, but for how special operations are perceived throughout the military." He pulled out his tablet and showed her a series of articles from military publications, internal memos, and even social media groups from active duty personnel, all discussing the Guardian and how her operations had challenged conventional thinking. "You've become a symbol," he explained. "They can promote you or punish you, but they can't erase what you've already inspired." Liv scrolled through the material, surprised by the extent of the discussions. Changes were already happening in some units, commanders giving more weight to specialist assessments, reconnaissance teams receiving greater operational flexibility, barriers breaking down between traditional military hierarchies. "So what's your advice?" she asked finally. "Take the promotion," Marcus said simply. "But on your terms, not theirs." The next morning, Liv requested a private meeting with General Harrison. He received her in his office at the Pentagon, the vast machinery of American military power humming around them. "I've considered your offer, sir," she began without preamble. "And?" "I'll accept the promotion, but not at the cost of my testimony or the changes I believe are necessary." Harrison's expression hardened. "That wasn't the offer, Sergeant." "I understand that, sir. I'm proposing a counteroffer." She placed a folder on his desk. "My full acceptance, contingent on these conditions." The general opened the folder warily. Inside was a detailed proposal, one that accepted the promotion but specifically outlined the operational changes she would implement, the communication structure she would establish, and the training program she would develop. "This is unprecedented," Harrison said after reviewing the document. "So is promoting a sergeant to lieutenant colonel, sir." The general studied her with new respect. "You're using their own maneuver against them. They try to co-opt you, you try to co-opt them. I prefer to think of it as finding common ground, sir. I get the authority to implement necessary changes, and you get to present those changes as coming from within the system rather than being forced upon it." Harrison leaned back, genuinely impressed. "You'd have made a hell of a general, Reeves." "With respect, sir, I'm trying to make sure we have more soldiers alive to become generals in the first place." After a long moment, Harrison extended his hand. Conditional acceptance. We'll need to negotiate some of these points, but the principle is sound. 3 months later, Lieutenant Colonel Olivia Reeves stood before the newly formed Special Reconnaissance Command, 5 units modeled after the original SRTIU. Each specialized for different operational environments, but all sharing the same core philosophy: intelligence, adaptability, and the courage to challenge conventional wisdom when lives were at stake. Marcus, now a sergeant major, and her senior enlisted advisor, stood beside her as they assembled operators. These weren't conventional soldiers. They were specialists who had often been overlooked or underutilized in traditional units. Snipers with extraordinary skills but attitude problems. Intelligence analysts who saw patterns others missed, but struggled with military formality. Communications experts who modified equipment in ways that violated regulations but achieved results no standard gear could match. Each of you is here because you've demonstrated exceptional abilities that don't always fit neatly into conventional military structures, Liv began. Some of you have been disciplined for those same abilities. Others have been passed over for promotion despite your results. She looked across the faces before her, men and women who had found themselves marginalized despite their talents, just as she once had been. That changes today. In this command, you will be judged by your effectiveness, your commitment, and your results, not by your conformity to tradition or your adherence to protocols that don't serve the mission. She outlined the operational philosophy that would guide them: intelligence-driven, adaptable, collaborative, rather than rigidly hierarchical. Where specialist knowledge would be valued as highly as rank, and initiative would be rewarded rather than punished. The ridge that started all this taught me something fundamental, she concluded. That sometimes saving lives requires the courage to disobey. But what we're building here aims higher, to create a system where that terrible choice isn't necessary, where the right decision is also the authorized one. As the units dispersed to begin their specialized training, Marcus remained behind. Quite a journey from that toy doll taped to your rifle case, he observed. The journey's just beginning, Liv replied, watching the operators, her operators now, moving with new purpose and confidence. But at least now we're on the right path. 6 months later, Liv received the call that would test everything she had built. A situation was developing in the Caucasus Mountains, a region where traditional military assets had limited effectiveness due to the terrain and political complexities. Intelligence suggested American hostages were being held in a remote compound, with plans to execute them within 48 hours. Conventional rescue operations were deemed too risky given the location and time constraints. The Joint Chiefs had specifically requested her newly formed command to handle the situation, the first major test of the changes she had fought to implement. In the command center, Liv studied the intelligence materials with her team leaders. Unlike the hierarchical briefings she'd endured years earlier, this was a collaborative assessment, each specialist contributing their expertise without regard to rank. Terrain favors a small team insertion from the northern approach, offered Captain Torres, formerly a ranger who had been passed over for promotion due to his unconventional tactical theories. But the weather window is narrow, 6 hours maximum. Major Chun, an intelligence specialist who had once been relegated to support roles despite her brilliance, indicated several thermal signatures on the satellite imagery. Pattern analysis suggests 24 guards, with a rotation schedule centered on these positions. Their equipment suggests Serbian mercenaries, not local militants. Sergeant Walker, a communications expert who had been disciplined in his previous unit for modifying equipment, outlined an approach using customized gear he had developed. We can maintain contact through the mountain passes using these relay devices, even with the electromagnetic interference in the region. Liv absorbed all this information, asking clarifying questions, but never dismissing any assessment out of hand, the opposite of how her own observations had once been treated. Recommendations? She asked finally. The team presented a unified approach, a small, specialized insertion team using the northern route, supported by 2 observation teams on the ridgelines, with a modified extraction plan that utilized local terrain features conventional operations would have considered obstacles. Liv reviewed their proposal carefully, then nodded her approval. Prepare for immediate deployment. I'll inform command of our operational parameters. When she contacted General Harrison, his response was immediate. The Joint Chiefs have authorized your operation with full parameters. No restrictions, no overrides. The trust implicit in that authorization, so different from the dismissive treatment of years past, validated everything she had fought for. Not special treatment for herself, but a system that recognized expertise and valued lives over rigid adherence to traditional approaches. 48 hours later, as she monitored the operation from the forward command post, Liv watched the mission unfold with precision and adaptability. When unexpected weather conditions closed the original extraction route, her teams seamlessly shifted to an alternate approach they had prepared, something that would have required hours of authorization in the old system. When the hostages were safely extracted without a single American casualty, the congratulations poured in from the highest levels of military command, not just for the success, but for the methodology that had achieved it. Later that evening, as the rescued hostages received medical attention and debriefing, Liv stood alone outside the command post, staring at the distant mountains where the operation had played out. Marcus joined her, offering a rare celebratory cigar. "Textbook operation," he commented. "Or rather, the new textbook you're writing." "Not me," she corrected. "All of us. Every specialist who was told their approach wouldn't work. Every analyst whose insights were dismissed. Every operator who saw a better way but wasn't heard." She thought about the journey from that ridge to this moment, from disobeying orders in desperation to creating a system where the best decisions were also the authorized ones. "You know what I realized?" she said, watching the smoke drift upward. "That toy doll they left on my rifle case, Barbie Sniper, they meant it as an insult. But they inadvertently revealed something important." "What's that?" "That what they feared wasn't my gender or even my methods. It was the idea that excellence could come from unexpected places. That someone outside their traditional power structure could change everything." Marcus nodded thoughtfully. "And now?" "Now we've proven that fear was justified." She smiled, not with triumph, but with the quiet satisfaction of meaningful change. "Not because we broke their system, but because we're building a better one." As they stood there in the gathering darkness, Liv's secure tablet alerted her to an incoming message. Another operation. Another challenge for her unconventional command. There would always be more missions, more lives at stake, more systems resistant to change. But for the first time, she faced these challenges not as an outsider fighting against the institution, but as a force for transformation within it. Still the guardian, but now with the authority to protect not just individual soldiers, but the very future of how America fought its wars. She had disobeyed orders to save 395 lives. Now she was changing orders to save countless more. 5 years after the formation of the Special Reconnaissance Command, Olivia Reeves found herself in a position she'd never imagined, seated across from the President in the Situation Room as the newly appointed Director of Special Operations. The walls around them displayed real-time intelligence from operations across the globe, many utilizing the methodology she had pioneered. "Colonel Reeves," the President began, using her current rank rather than her new title, "I've reviewed your proposal for Operation Chimera. It's unconventional." Liv nodded, maintaining the same calm demeanor she displayed years ago in that first command briefing. "Unconventional threats require unconventional responses, Madam President." The threat in question was unprecedented, a coordinated series of potential attacks across multiple continents, orchestrated by a network that operated beyond traditional terrorist structures. Conventional intelligence had struggled to penetrate it, and standard military approaches would be ineffective against its decentralized nature. You're proposing to deploy your specialized units simultaneously to 13 countries, some of which are not officially allied with us, the Secretary of Defense noted, his tone suggesting the political complications this would create. I am, Liv confirmed without hesitation. The network operates across those borders. Our response must do the same. The National Security Advisor shook his head. The diplomatic implications alone will be less severe than the implications of simultaneous attacks in major cities. Liv interrupted, something she would never have dared do in her sergeant days. With respect, we're not discussing hypothetical risks. We're discussing the prevention of mass casualties. She displayed the intelligence her teams had gathered, patterns invisible to conventional analysis, but clear to the specialists she had recruited and empowered. Connections between seemingly unrelated events. Communication signatures that revealed operational preparations. Movement patterns that indicated coordinated action. The room fell silent as the evidence accumulated, undeniable in its clarity and implications. Finally, the President spoke. How confident are you in this assessment, Colonel? Confident enough that I'm staking my career on it, Liv replied simply. Just as I did on that ridge 5 years ago. The mention of the ridge, now legendary in military circles, shifted the atmosphere in the room. Even those who had never served understood its significance. How a sergeant's decision to disobey orders had saved hundreds of lives and changed military doctrine forever. You have authorization, the President said finally. Full operational parameters as requested. As the meeting concluded and officials filed out, the President asked Liv to remain behind. When they were alone, the Commander-in-Chief studied her with evident curiosity. You know, I've read every report about the Ridge incident. About how you climbed an impossible route in the dark, against direct orders, because you saw something no one else did. Liv remained silent, waiting. What I've always wondered, the President continued, is not why you did it, but how you knew you were right when everyone else, everyone with more rank and authority, told you that you were wrong. It was a profound question, one that struck at the heart of Liv's journey from outsider to leader. She considered her answer carefully. I trusted what I saw more than what I was told, she said finally. Not because I thought I was smarter or better, but because I'd learned that reality doesn't always conform to our expectations or our hierarchy. The President nodded slowly. That's a rare quality in military circles. It shouldn't be, Liv replied. And now it's becoming less so. In the weeks that followed, Operation Chimera unfolded with the precision and adaptability that had become the hallmark of Liv's command philosophy. 13 specialized teams operating independently yet coordinated, each adapting to local conditions while maintaining the overall mission parameters. When the operation concluded, the threat had been neutralized without a single American casualty, and more importantly, without the civilian casualties that would have resulted from the planned attacks. In the operational review that followed, General Harrison, now the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, summarized what many were thinking. 5 years ago, this operation would have been impossible. Not just logistically, but conceptually. We simply didn't have the structures or the mindset to execute something this complex and adaptive. Liv accepted the assessment with characteristic modesty, deflecting credit to the teams and the specialists who had made it possible. But privately, she allowed herself to recognize how far they had come, from a sergeant forced to disobey orders to save lives, to a command philosophy that empowered people to save lives within the system rather than despite it. The following spring, Liv returned to Montana for the first time in nearly a decade. The mountains of her childhood rose around her as she drove the familiar road to her father's cabin. At 72, James Reeves still lived alone in the wilderness that had shaped his daughter's extraordinary skills. She found him on the porch, carving wood as he always had. His hands were more weathered now, his hair completely white, but his eyes remained sharp as they caught sight of her approaching. "There's my girl," he said simply, setting aside his project and rising to embrace her. "Or should I say, Director?" Liv smiled, returning his hug. "Just live out here, Dad. Always." They spent the evening as they always had, preparing a simple meal together and talking without pretense. James Reeves had never been impressed by rank or titles, only by character and skill, values he had instilled in his daughter from her earliest years. "Your mother would have been proud," he said as they sat by the fire afterward, stars emerging in the Montana sky above them. "Not of the medals or the rank. Of the lives you've saved." Liv nodded, thinking of her mother who had died when she was just 14. A forest ranger who had perished helping others evacuate during a wildfire, choosing duty over safety, just as Liv had on that fateful ridge. "I learned it from both of you," she said quietly. James studied his daughter, seeing beyond the accomplished military leader to the child he had taught to hunt and track and survive. "Your new position. You're changing things even more now, aren't you?" "Trying to," she confirmed. "It's slower than I'd like sometimes." Institutions resist change, especially ones with hundreds of years of tradition. Her father smiled knowingly. "Reminds me of something my father told me. Sometimes the bravest thing isn't facing danger. It's facing the people who want to keep doing things the same way, even when that way doesn't work anymore." Liv recognized the wisdom in those words. Physical courage had never been her challenge. She'd faced enemy fire without flinching countless times. The greater courage had been standing before commanding officers, senators, and now presidents, insisting that there was a better way forward even when tradition and hierarchy pushed back. "I have something for you," her father said, retrieving a small wooden box from inside the cabin. "Been working on it since I heard about your new position." Inside the box lay a beautifully carved compass, its design unlike any standard military issue equipment. The craftsmanship was exquisite, every detail perfect. "It's beautiful, Dad," she said, lifting it carefully. "Look closer," he instructed. On the underside of the lid, he had carved a simple inscription, "To find true north when others lose their way." The words caught her by surprise, touching something deep within her. From that first desperate climb up the ridge, to her current position shaping national security policy, that had been her journey, finding true north, the correct path, when conventional wisdom had lost its way. "Thank you," she said softly, the simple phrase carrying the weight of all they shared. The next morning, as dawn broke over the mountains, Liv joined her father on a familiar hiking trail. They moved in comfortable silence, two people perfectly attuned to the wilderness and to each other. When they reached the summit overlooking the valley, they paused to take in the view. "You know what I'm most proud of?" James said suddenly. "Not what you've accomplished, impressive as it is, but that you never let them change who you are." Liv understood exactly what he meant. Through all the transformations in her career, from sergeant to director, from outsider to insider, she had maintained her core principles. The willingness to stand apart when necessary. The courage to speak truth regardless of consequence. The fundamental belief that saving lives mattered more than following protocols. There were times it would have been easier, she admitted, to just go along, accept the promotion they offered to silence me, become part of the system without trying to change it. Her father nodded. Easy paths rarely lead anywhere worth going. As they descended from the summit, Liv's secure phone vibrated with a message. Another situation developing. Another challenge requiring her attention. The world never stopped, and neither did her responsibility to it. "Duty calls?" her father asked, noting her expression. "Always does." She smiled ruefully. "I'll have to cut my visit short." James Reeves showed no disappointment, only understanding. "Go do what you do best. I'll be here when you can come back." Before departing for the airport, Liv made one stop at a small military cemetery where her former spotter, the one who had died before the Ridge incident, was buried. She placed a stone on his headstone, a tradition she maintained whenever possible. "We fixed it, Michael," she said quietly to the silent marker. "Not all at once, and not perfectly. But we're getting there." The changes she had implemented, first in her small unit and now throughout special operations, meant fewer names would join his in these solemn grounds. Fewer families would receive flags folded into triangles. Fewer lives would be lost to rigid thinking and inflexible systems. That evening, as her aircraft lifted off, Liv opened the compass her father had given her. In the dim cabin light, its needle pointed unerringly north, just as her own internal compass had guided her through the most challenging decisions of her career. Her secure tablet displayed the latest intelligence briefings, new threats emerging, new challenges to face. The work would never be done, the mission never complete. But the path forward was clearer now, not just for her, but for the entire command structure she had helped transform. A message from Marcus appeared on her screen. "You'll want to see this." Attached was footage from a training exercise, one of the newest reconnaissance teams executing a complex mission using the methodology she had pioneered. The team leader, a young woman who reminded Liv of herself a decade earlier, was making split-second decisions based on ground truth rather than predetermined plans. More significantly, her commanding officer was supporting those decisions rather than overriding them, trusting the specialist's expertise even when it diverged from conventional approaches. This, more than any medal or promotion, represented Liv's true legacy. Not just lives saved in the moment through her direct action, but a fundamental shift in how the military operated. A transformation that would save lives for generations to come. 3 months later, Liv stood before a graduating class at West Point, invited to deliver the commencement address, another position she would never have imagined occupying years earlier. Looking out at the sea of young faces, she saw the future of the military, men and women, who would lead in a world of unprecedented complexity and rapidly evolving threats. Who would face decisions she couldn't imagine, challenges she wouldn't see. "You've spent years studying military history and doctrine," she began, setting aside the formal speech prepared for her. "Learning the rules and traditions that have shaped our armed forces for centuries. That knowledge is valuable, essential even. But today I want to talk about something they don't teach in any textbook." She told them about the Ridge, not as the heroic tale it had become in military legend, but as the human story it truly was, a specialist seeing what others missed, being dismissed, and then making the hardest choice of her life. "The most important lesson from that night isn't about disobeying orders," she explained. "It's about creating systems where the right decision doesn't require disobedience in the first place, where expertise is valued regardless of rank, where saving lives matters more than adhering to tradition." She challenged them to become leaders who listened more than they commanded, who sought truth rather than confirmation, who valued effectiveness over conformity. The courage to stand alone on a ridge when everyone else has turned back, that's important, she concluded. But the courage to change systems that make such stands necessary, that's leadership. As the applause echoed across the parade ground, Liv recognized that her journey had come full circle. From the sergeant whose insights were dismissed, to the leader ensuring others' insights would be heard. From the outsider fighting against the system, to the architect helping rebuild it from within. Back in her office at the Pentagon later that week, Liv found a small package waiting on her desk. Inside was a custom-made challenge coin, a military tradition for recognizing excellence. One side bore the Special Reconnaissance Command insignia. The other showed a solitary figure standing on a ridge, rifle in hand. The note accompanying it read simply, "From the original 395, we never forgot." Liv held the coin tightly, thinking of how far they had come from that desperate night. How many lives had been saved, not just by her actions, but by the transformation those actions had sparked throughout the military. In the years since disobeying those orders, she had helped create a system where specialists were heard, where intelligence shaped operations rather than being filtered through hierarchy, where adaptation was valued over rigid adherence to plans. The toy doll that had once been taped to her rifle case as an insult, Barbie Sniper, now sat in a display case in her office. Not as a trophy, but as a reminder of what happened when excellence was dismissed because it came from unexpected sources. Next to it stood a photograph of her original team from the Ridge, and beside that, images of the specialized units now operating worldwide using the methodologies they had pioneered. The evolution was visible, tangible, from a desperate act of disobedience to save lives, to a comprehensive transformation that would save countless more. As night fell over Washington, Liv stood at her office window, the lights of the Capitol spreading below her. Somewhere in those buildings, policies were being shaped and decisions made that would affect lives around the globe. She was part of that process now, her voice heard at the highest levels. But in her mind, she was still on that ridge, making the hardest and simplest decision of her life, to do what was right, regardless of the consequences. Everything that had come after, the medals, the promotions, the systemic changes flowed from that single moment of moral clarity. The legacy of that night wasn't measured in decorations or rank, or even the 395 lives immediately saved. It was measured in the transformation that followed, in the lives that would never be at risk because the system now valued truth over tradition, effectiveness over conformity, and moral courage over blind obedience. Olivia Reeves had disobeyed orders to save 395 soldiers left for dead. But in doing so, she had changed the very nature of orders themselves, ensuring that future generations of service members would never have to make the terrible choice between following commands and saving lives. That was a victory beyond any battlefield, a legacy that would endure long after her own service ended. And as she looked out over the city where the nation's future was shaped each day, she knew with absolute certainty that some orders were meant to be broken, not out of defiance, but out of duty to a higher principle. The compass her father had given her sat on her desk, still pointing unerringly north. In a world of shifting threats and evolving challenges, that constant direction, that commitment to saving lives above all else, remained her truest guide. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.